we need to have the ability to put in dry lines, if you will, now, so that we can hook up solar charging stations later. And the third thing is EV education. GRU has a great website, but I think the city could do more. I think the city and the county could coordinate together on educating the public on what's available out there for EVs. I mean, the price is dropping. When I bring up the subject to a lot of people, eyes start to roll. They say, oh, you're one of those Tesla people. Well, no, it's just so much more than Tesla now. And so much is happening. And we're on the cusp of where we were 100 years ago when the buggy and whip manufacturers are saying, oh, it will never happen. It'll never happen. That newfangled automobile, no, won't happen. It's happening now. And I would expect by 2030, we're going to have a much more difficult time buying an internal combustion engine than we are an EV. If we get on that bandwagon now, we as a city, as a community, we can get ahead of the curve and start increasing revenues, start reducing net greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, I'm sure you all saw the city's greenhouse gas inventory, where local transportation is 40% of the net greenhouse gases in the area. I was lucky to have a chance to talk with Adam recently, and Adam's got some great points about how EVs really help build resiliency. And that's something this community needs to work on, is being locally self-supported in how we generate our energy, how we use our energy. So those are the three topical areas. I went to the sustainability officer first, those three topical areas. I'm going to wrap up with two areas, two plans I think I would like to see our two committees working on together. One is our UAB policy plan. I hope to have it done by the time I leave my term on the UAB, which is in March of 2022. We have neighborhood workshops that are going on now. Our next one's on Saturday. And just as importantly, if not more importantly, the utility has what's called an IRP, and that is an integrated resource plan for 2022. That sets out the plan for what the utility is going to be doing for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's where we really need community involvement. We need folks like y'all. I'm hoping that GRU has a chance to bring that, at least a presentation before your committee, maybe a joint committee meeting to discuss those, I don't know. But those are all the kind of the areas where I see overlap. And I look forward to working with y'all. And just this short time that I've been on here, I've learned so much already. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much, Wes. So this part, I told Wes that this is probably going to be informal, because that's just how we usually roll. So I wanted to open this up to the rest of the committee for a conversation. Mike, I see your hand. So little digital Zoom hands or just waving your screen. I'm going to try to keep track, but looking to get your thoughts on what Wes has said on some of those initiatives where that he's identified, where there's a lot of overlap between what UAB is working on and what we on CCAC are working on, and then some thoughts also on next steps. You know, where can we take this actual action that we can start taking immediately? So, Mike, I'll throw it to you, and then any other members on CCAC, raise your hand or jump in.
Sure, thank you. Just thought I'd fill in a couple of or follow up on a couple of quick points that Wes made as far as what local government is doing. Alachua County does have some of their fleet are electrical vehicles. The prices are dropping. Our fleet manager, Gerald Bailey, tracks that pretty closely. I think he's got some electrical charging stations at Public Works, but it would be good to have those deployed a little bit more widely as our fleet grows. I don't know the size of the fleet, but these are for vehicles that can handle it. He's looking at, you know, he has said that the biggest way, our biggest fuel cost and carbon emission is hauling waste to the New River landfill. So when that reduces, that's the biggest rock to move, but he is moving other rocks that he can. The other thing is, and I don't have precise details on you, but certain of our development standards for things like traditional neighborhood developments and transit-oriented developments, those development standards which apply based on the size or the number of units being proposed in these mixed-use developments are required to put in, I think, level 2 charging stations. I don't have the specific details, but generally there are some standards. And yes, I agree though with your point, Wes, that that should be a more widespread development standard. You know, I certainly could see the city and county requiring gas stations when they go to redevelop or build new, also put in EV charging stations and those sorts of things. I think parking garages, I don't remember if our standards require them there or not. We don't tend to go out of parking garages unless the developer has to. So there are some standards, and it's probably time to reevaluate whether or not those should be increased or spread more widely. So just thought I'd add.
Okay. That's a great suggestion. Brenda and I drove up to Maine and back last year for a family wedding. We weren't going to travel by air because of COVID. We stopped at gas stations all the way up and back because they had partnerships with charging partners. And it was a great partnership.
Out of curiosity, Wes, how much, if you did this in an EV, how much time do you think was added? Were you able to access fast chargers where you just kind of built it into a normal break, or how was that logistically?
How would I say this diplomatically? We can drive about 2 to 2.5 hours, and a man of my age and station in life.
So the car was not the limiting factor?
Yes, I needed to stop out at the same time that the car did. And every 2 to 2.5 hours, we would get out and stretch our legs, hit a snack. It didn't slow us down at all. Get out and stretch. It was I mean, people ask that a lot. It was a non-issue. Finding charging stations was a non-issue. I mean, we never had a problem. I never had range anxiety. We have about 250 to 280 miles in our car. Never was an issue.
Well, that's good to know. I feel like the range anxiety, the concern for people about being able to use their vehicle, not just for local travel, but longer distance travel is one of the big impediments. And if figuring out or getting the word out that is changing and that's no longer the barrier that it once was, I think is important.
90% of the time we charge at home. 90% of the time we drive less than 30 miles a day, probably less than 10 miles a day. So folks just don't, all they think about, oh, I won't have anywhere to drive. Well, you don't, it's not been an issue.
It's good to know. All right, I see Amanda, and then after Amanda, Stephen. Amanda, please go ahead.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Wes, for that presentation. I have to admit, I don't know a whole lot about the UAB, so I like learning about those 3 areas that you talked about. Can you tell me a little bit more about the UAB policy plan? What is the goal of that? And will it have actual measures that you're going to ask the city or GRU to take on?
The policy plan is something we've been working on for a couple of years. It's at the 10,000 foot level. It's base policies, but to summarize, elevator speech is trying to provide safe, reliable, competitive priced utility services in an environmentally responsible manner. And it's always difficult with the utility because the general manager and I clash often because I'm trying to push harder for a transition to renewable energy. And he's saying, well, renewable energy is great, but we have clouds and we have nighttime. So there has to be some sort of reliable source. Now, that typically has been coal or gas, mostly gas here now. I'd like to see us move more towards storage, battery. But the policy, the UAB policy, is to try and address all the many issues that the city has to deal with and tie in how we can service those areas better as a utility. My emphasis has been on environmental issues, but there's multiple issues in here and multiple chapters in this policy plan that addresses everything from the built environments to design standards, utility supply and distribution, transportation and land use. We cover a myriad of issues in there, and we try and tie them all back to how can the utility better serve the community in providing those. Does that sound like a canned answer or what?
Thank you.
Really? Yeah, it's a general answer, but it is a general plan at this point.
Thank you, Wes. I'm sorry I came in late. I wish I'd heard your complete presentation. There's so much to say about what can be done with our utilities here in Gainesville. You know, the fact is, it's a municipally owned utility, which takes it for the most part out of the hands of the shareholders, and it actually puts it in our hands to make good decisions about how to use it. I'm hopeful that we can develop a much more collaborative relationship with the general manager and with the UAB. I think having a joint meeting is an excellent idea. I would strongly support that. To cover a fixed agenda of certain issues, specifically utility grade solar with battery storage and how we can implement that in stages over, say, a 10-year period. I'm sympathetic with the general manager's concerns about having to transition all at once. And I frankly don't think that's possible for almost any community in Florida. The one thing I would say is that when you look at the extent, the speed, and the irreversibility of climate change impacts, this has caught many in the scientific community flat-footed. We didn't see how bad it was going to get. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. What we're seeing now in the Pacific Northwest is unprecedented damage, and it's a compound climate disaster that started with the heat dome, then spread to fires, and now to massive landslides, and more rain is on the way. And as one commentator put it, the penny's really going to drop when it starts to freeze. So there's you know, hundreds of thousands of people in that region that are behind the 8 ball. Our regional disaster will come in the form of a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane that carries enormous amounts of rainfall into the interior of the state and has massive flooding and takes out most of our utilities. So, you know, I think disaster reduction, disaster risk reduction should be at the top of our list. And I hope maybe it's something we can discuss with the UAB, what that would look like in terms of the utilities role. I want to briefly mention a couple of other things that I think are really critical. And I think one is framing. I think the way to frame our energy issues is as energy security rather than necessarily greenhouse gas reductions. We of course need to do our part to reduce greenhouse gases, and we really should be doing utility grade photovoltaic along with battery storage or some other form of distributed energy. We need to look carefully at our grid. We need to think carefully about how to do this neighborhood by neighborhood rather than all at once. So I want to mention one more thing before I stop abusing you. And one is Gainesville is a reasonably bike-friendly community. It still has a ways to go. I'm a cyclist and have been for 20 years. I now ride an electric bicycle to and from work 10 miles each way. And I fill up my 10-gallon tank in a Prius once every 2 months. And I use the Prius mainly just to go grocery shopping, but if I was really energetic, I could easily grocery shop on my electric bike. You know, it's just one of the things you might consider in terms of transportation is promoting electric bikes and use of electric personal vehicles, not just cars. Cars have a huge expense up front. You can buy really lightweight electric bikes now for $3,000. It sounds like a lot, but it's a hell of a lot better than trying to come up with money for a Prius or something like that. The other thing to mention is the bus schedules. My students in all in both of my face-to-face courses this semester are complaining about the reduction in the bus schedule because it's affected them in the apartments where they live. near the university. And, you know, it strikes me that one of the things that needs to be very seriously considered is how to improve the reliability, the scheduling, and the connectedness of the RTS. So it's my feeling, based on what I know about the regional transportation system, that it's poorly connected and it's not serving the needs of people who would essentially use it if they thought it was reliable. It was something they would use. I would use it if I thought it was reliable and it could get me where I need to go when I need to get there. So anyway, thanks for listening to me. I'm grateful you're here.
Well, thank you for your comments, and you raised a lot of great points. GRU is owned by the people it serves. That's the motto, the slogan you'll see up on the side of the Kelly gas station downtown. And we have done great things. We're at 30% renewable, which is more than any other utility in the state, and we're really, really proud of that. We should be. Biomass has been an important part of that. And I will sit there and I will argue with anybody. That is a great plan, a great idea. We should be doing more of it. We have a carbon cycle. It's a natural carbon cycle. This thing's not increasing carbon to anywhere. It's using wood waste, not trees. It's just a great facility. We're doing some really good things in the community. I need to give kudos to GRU for doing those things, but you're right. We're at a point now where the entire utility industry is at a transition. As you mentioned, the penny is about to drop in a lot of ways. And it's going to catch GRU and every other utility in a vice. How are they going to make that transition? You mentioned we can't do it all at once, but we got to find a way of getting there. We're going to be replacing one of our major power plants in 2030. I would like to see a series of steps where we reduce the need for total power out of that particular plant so that we don't have to build back one as large as what we have now. So those are just things I would like to see. I think that's something that GRU is working on, or the UAB is working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes. Anybody else have any questions or comments? I mean, this is really designed to be a conversation. So any other thoughts? Y'all are quiet tonight. All
I really
right.
don't have any thoughts. It's the UAB is, and I'm sure have found the same thing. We're kind of caught in the crosshairs. Every public body is caught in the crosshairs now. There's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of push and pull. I understand when people say, Wheeler, you're pushing too hard, you're pushing too fast. But we don't have a whole lot of time left. And we can't wait. I mean, the city has a goal of being 100% renewable by 2045. And I've heard comments, oh, listen, it's only 2021. We've got another 24 years. Cool it. Oh, no, these things happen in stages. So we need to start taking steps now. So, and sometimes that irritates people, but it's difficult because it's expensive. Elitist in public meetings more than once, which is what I'm trying to say. I'm not elitist. We need to have components that every aspect of our community can participate in. But when folks say, well, you can't do these environmental programs, you can't do this because it's going to raise rates, I'm saying to you and to those folks, if we don't start doing this now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, all hell's going to break loose. Rates are going to go through the roof. And those folks who can least afford it, who can least be able to react to those changes, are going to be the worst affected if we don't start acting now.
Thanks, Wes.
Sorry, that was my rant. I'll rant off.
No, we engage with ranting on this committee occasionally, as long as it's like constructive and fairly on topic. Stacy, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just sorry. I was just curious, Wes, about the event you're going to be doing on Saturday, a community event. What is that?
It is called GRU in the Neighborhood. It is an effort by the City Communications Office, GRU's Communications Office, and one of our UAB members, Carla Lewis. We have 2 meetings. One's already held in the Duval community. Second one is going to be in the SWAG area. It's going to be at Tower Road Library. And the emphasis of these 2 meetings is to go out to these folks. A lot of folks upset about the rate increases or how much our utilities cost. And we're going to have to folks explaining this is what we're doing, this is why we're looking at the long range, and get feedback to incorporate into the plan. I mean, one of the things that came up at our last meeting was a community solar project. Well, Florida's a little screwy in that you can't do true community solar. Only a utility is allowed to provide solar to its customers. Utility is defined by state law. But I mean, perhaps there's ways we can target certain neighborhoods. I don't know. There's got to be some things we can do. City of Tallahassee has a program where you can buy into their solar field, where you can say, I want to be a solar customer, and you agree that your rates are going to be X amount for the next number of years. I think that's a great idea. And that might be something we could do here. But I'm rambling on, Stacy. To get to the point of these workshops is to get some feedback on the policy plan. This policy plan has been languishing for a while. I'd love to see more public comment and then move to implementing it. Thank you.
Yeah, are there any more scheduled beyond the one this Saturday?
No, not at this time. Commissioner Harvey Ward has expressed an interest in scheduling another one. That's kind of above my pay grade at this point.
If you catch wind of that, please let us know, because we might be working on some stakeholder engagement survey stuff, and there might be some synergy there. So I'll make a note too to keep in touch.
That would be good. Our initial efforts in community engagement, well, I'll start off by saying that we held public meetings, publicly noticed meetings, and encouraged people to attend for about 2 years. And then the criticism was made, well, you haven't engaged the community enough. And the first response was to put up a single question questionnaire on GOU's website. And you can imagine the type of response that got. Everybody was just venting their anger and unhappiness at our utility rates. So we needed to do something more constructive, something more targeted, and that's what these workshops are. While we're on rates, I can't pass up the opportunity to note on GOU's behalf that we're not the highest in the state when it comes to electrical utilities, and B, so many people grab their utility bill and say, my light bill is through the roof. How can you do this? And you say, it's your electrical bill and your gas bill. It's your water and your wastewater. It's your garbage. It's a lot. In some cases, it's crew com. There are multiple utilities being provided here, so we need to distinguish that and get the word out. And Robert, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you've probably done this for years yourself, but that we just need to let folks know that there's a lot more involved than just turning your lights on. Rant off, but yes, Stacy, as more workshops come up, I'll let you know. I'll be sure to pass the information on.
One thing that I've always found, I used to give a lot of tours, and you take people to a large steam fire, like a coal-fired or a natural gas steam power plant, and it's huge. It's very complicated, and it really opens people's eyes to see what it takes to be able to come home, flip the switch. It's always on. You know, we've become so used to having it available. I mean, if it goes out for 30 minutes, we're all angry, like, oh my God, no power, you know. So have your internet go out and have them tell you, oh, we'll be there next Friday or something. And it's like, what? You know, so, but yeah, it's not easy.
I'll tag along with that. Again, I'm being a cheerleader, but GRU has national awards for their dependability, their reliability. I think it's called a platinum level distinction. I don't know if you, but I mean, we're nationally recognized for how well we respond to when our power goes down and out.
So Wes, I don't know if you all, I'm trying to read the chat also, like bringing comments from folks who are here as attendees. I'm seeing one saying that they searched the GRU website and didn't find any information about the workshop, this upcoming one. I'm assuming that means this Saturday. How is that being noticed?
It's on our website, or sorry, it's on our Facebook page now. To the Public Communications Office is getting out through Facebook. And I don't know what they're doing in the actual communities, but I do know it's on Facebook.
Okay, and then the other question was details about that meeting. Can you, do you know off the top of your head, the building and the time?
You're catching me flat-footed, but I'm going to go to my Facebook page while we are talking. And
Well, okay, so while you're doing that, I have a follow-up question. One of the things that our committee has been struggling with is that community outreach component. Like, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna actually reach the people that we want to talk to? Do you have any lessons learned from, the last couple of years when you all been trying to do the same thing?
we have been doing it through our meetings, our publicly noticed meetings. And in this particular case, we are relying heavily on staff. We have communication staff who are bearing the brunt of all this work. So it's relying on a professional public employees who know what they're doing, in my case. In this one, I'm just showing up because they've organized it. All right, here we go. Saturday, November 20, 10 a.m. to noon at the Tower Road Library, 3020 Southwest 75th Street in Gainesville. It's called GRU in the Neighborhood. Carla Lewis from the UAB is taking the lead. We'll have several employees from GRU speaking at this as well. And again, it's more about getting feedback than it is about telling folks what we're doing.
So I had, if nobody else has a follow-up question, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was kind of next steps for us and for being able to collaborate. And I know that when I spoke to you, I learned some things that I was not aware of, things that were going on that I, had no idea about. And I know you just mentioned that with this LEAP grant the county's working on, that was something that you all were unaware of also. So in terms of staying informed, because I feel like because you all were with the city, you're getting a lot of information from the city. Because we're kind of organized through the county, our main liaison is with the county, that we're getting a lot more county level information. Does it make sense for a member of the CCAC to regularly attend your UAB meetings? And do you think there's anybody on the UAB who would be interested in coming and attending our meetings to try to keep those communications channels open?
So long as I'm chair and so long as you would invite me, I would be delighted to attend your meetings if I had the time available to do so. And y'all are all welcome to attend anytime you like the UAB meetings. We do have a representative from the county and from the school board on UAB now. Don Davis from the county and Teresa Sprouting Wood from the school board. And I'm forgetting one and it'll come to me in a minute. There's a third non-voting representative.
And when are your meetings? You have I'm assuming you have a regular schedule.
We have our regular meetings on the second Thursday of the month, and the fourth, we have workshops on the fourth Tuesday. I highly recommend that you not come to the workshops at the beginning of the next year because they're almost certainly all going to be budget workshops. Unless, of course, you have trouble sleeping, in which case, go for it.
So we have our meetings are also the second Thursday of the month. Our regularly scheduled ones are. This is unusual because we have Veterans Day. So that's a challenge. That's something, I guess, on our committee, maybe that's something that we evaluate or reevaluate in the new year, is whether there's another day of the week or week of the month that works for us. Because I feel like it's not beneficial for us to have that direct overlap. I definitely want to keep up with what's going on with UAB. I think there's a lot of benefit to that, and having it on the same night basically means we're stuck watching the recording and not actually being able to have a live communication, which is not ideal.
Let me talk to Harvey, Commissioner Ward, and perhaps we can talk to Chair Wheeler. And let me dispel the myths and the rumors. No, Mary Helen and I are not brother and sister. It's been said by many a person, but no, we're not related.
Sounds good. Well, our meeting times are not set by anybody but ourselves, which is why I suggested that perhaps we could be the one that could move. because it's a lot easier. We basically just have to agree amongst ourselves to move our meetings and then start noticing them that way.
Well, let's you and I talk about that going into the new year,
Sounds good.
and we can figure out what to do in the spring. My term as chair ends in March, but I'm sure we'll have someone else coming on board then. So if anybody, and there may be some positions coming up on the UAB if somebody's interested in
Are you
dual
poaching?
committing.
Wes, are you poaching my committee?
Well, now that you mention it,
So
so
loud. I don't know, is that
I really
loud?
appreciate- yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity for me to come and speak tonight. Like I said, I did learn a lot.
Well, it's been our pleasure and we're very grateful for your time. I know you have another engagement, so I want to be respectful of that and let you get out of here. But thank you very much. And yeah, you and I will talk again, figure out how to keep the communications open.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
You
Great, thank
too.
you, Wes.
Bye, Wes.
Bye.
Hi, Wes.
All right. Well, that was really useful. We probably should have done that before now. So any thoughts from the committee? I realize we lost Wes, but any thoughts from CCAC before we move on to the next agenda item?
I think you mentioned it, but just figuring out how we do want to work together with them will be key moving forward.
Agreed.
I think it would be worth revisiting the timing of the meetings. The fact that they fall on the same night is not helpful for the committees, but it's also not helpful for people who are interested in attending both of them.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Is that something, just to get kind of a brief survey of the committee, are you all open to possibly shifting our meeting to either a different day of the week or to a different week of the month? Seeing a couple nods.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Heather, do you mind sending out like a doodle poll or something to kind of get a feel for that? I know that Wes and I said we'd talk, but I do think it's easier for us to be the one to move if that's practical. So I would like to kind of get a feel for whether that's something that we have the ability to do. So that when I talk to him, I can kind of give that option if it's available.
Yeah, I can send out a doodle poll. We might be able to sort it out right now, though.
Well, we don't have it. The problem is we don't have everybody. Like John isn't even here, and he's our vice chair. So I don't want to leave anybody out on this. We can get I guess we can get a feel. Is there like a specific question that you have for everyone?
Is there a day of the week that you cannot do it?
Anybody?
I cannot do, what's today, Thursday, the second week Wednesdays.
Yeah, I agree with Trista. I really need to take time to look. So a poll will be the best way for me.
Okay. But we'll go ahead and say we're not doing second week Wednesdays.
Yeah. And that
Okay.
may be something easier for everyone here on the committee. Go ahead and take a look at your calendar and we can be proactive to help Heather narrow this down. If there is a specific day of the week or there's a specific day of the month that's a recurring event that you cannot do, please email that to Heather so that we can try to make that doodle poll a bit more compact. All right. All right, if there's nothing else, we'll move on. The next agenda, well, actually it's almost 7, so this is kind of a logical stopping place. We normally take our little 5-minute bio break, stretch our legs, get a glass of water. So if there aren't any objections, we can do that now, do a little early and come back here at 7, a minute 2 after 7 o'clock. Sound good?
Perfect.
All right, see y'all back here. I'm gonna give it another couple minutes, see if we get Steven back. All right. Looks like we're all back. All right, so the next item on our agenda is prioritizing vulnerabilities, which is something that we've tried to do before with mixed results, largely because we didn't quite know. I mean, at the time that we last did this, we really didn't know how the process for the climate action plan was going to work in terms of who was going to write it. We were kind of looking at trying to do it ourselves, which we've realized since is not really a practical way to go about this. So with regards to prioritizing vulnerabilities, I also wanted to kind of have a conversation with how we want to move forward with this. So I'll give you all kind of my vision, and then I would like your feedback. And then from there, we can look into actually going into what vulnerabilities we wanted to focus on first. So kind of what I was thinking about with this is we pick maybe 3 vulnerabilities that we want to start out with. And then for the next month's meeting, the committee members and staff will spend that in between month researching and brainstorming essentially action ideas with regards to that particular vulnerability. So that means, you know, going and looking what other communities have done in terms of their climate action plans. Are there any ideas or programs or policies that we think would be a good fit for Gainesville and Alachua County? Do you have any ideas that you come across from your own research, whether that's the academic literature, whether that's you know, some other source? So we would be doing that. Staff would be doing that. We'd also ask staff to go ahead and gather information about existing policies and programs that are relevant to that particular vulnerability, and ask them to put together just a brief, you know, presentation, like maybe it's just a slide, you know, that goes up at the beginning of the next meeting. And then we spend the following meeting discussing those ideas and figuring out which ones we really want to delve into, which ones we want to expand on, and look at actually, you know, delving into how we can implement them in our community. Does that sound like a workable process to everyone? Yes, no, maybe. Steven.
Thank you. So, excuse me. I agree, but can you define what you mean by vulnerability
right.
more explicitly? Thank you.
So yeah, absolutely. That I sent out the documents, the older documents a while ago, but let me see if I can do a screen share here.
Is that the CAP impacts and concerns?
You got it. All right. Can you all see this now?
Mhm.
Yep. All right. So this does not have to be the be all end all. This is something that I put together based on my own reading and knowledge of the scientific literature with regards to regional climate change impacts, and then kind of thinking about from basically, I mean, to use the language of risk, to look at the exposure that we expect as a result of climate change, and then start thinking about what our vulnerabilities are as a community, and that's how I came up with these you know, concerns, which are really the vulnerability or the risk that is likely or possibly impacting our community. So the actual spreadsheet is yeah, like the behind the scenes version actually takes each one of these potential adverse effects, and then I try to show which categories it is related to, that it could impact. But then for this version, this was kind of a judgment call, what I consider to be the primary sector related to each of these concerns or adverse effects. So yeah, so I mean, kind of natural ecosystem concerns, somewhat related to that are concerns about agricultural compatibility. Both of those, are natural systems. Then looking at transportation, with a focus on, the movement of people, right? Energy, built environment, housing, buildings, infrastructure, water, public health, and then kind of to Stephen, to your point earlier where you're talking about disaster risk reduction, I've categorized a lot of that under CIKR or critical infrastructure key resources. And then looking at that in terms of, on a systems level, the potential for cascading failures. So this is kind of what, that's the big list that I've been going off of. I welcome any feedback on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to vote for disaster risk reduction, or as you call it, CIKR, as the top thing on the list. That includes, if you open that up, you'll see several categories that are overlapping. Healthcare, public health, I would call that. Cascading failures, wildfires are less of a problem here. Power outages, transportation disruptions, potential for massive flooding because of the attribution characteristics of hurricanes coming ashore now, and emergency services. I think that should be our top consideration in preparing the community in our climate action plan. All of the other things, I'm an ecologist, so you would think that I would put the ecosystem shift at the top of the list, but I don't. I think the thing that we need to take under our charge that I think is critically important is protecting the people that live here. And so I think that disaster risk reduction should be our top category of emphasis. And that, in fact, may be so all-encompassing that the other stuff will follow naturally in bits and pieces. But, the sorts of things that could happen to this community are not being considered, say, for the Southeastern Climate Compact. The Southeastern Climate Compact is still operating at a 30,000-foot level with respect to things like sea level rise and salinization of waters and that sort of thing. Those things are important, but I would think that to leave our disaster risk reduction to already overburdened employees that are responsible for that would be a mistake. I think we need to bring them the best science that we possibly can.
So, largely I agree with you, Stephen. I think that is a very critical and key focus that we need to put our attention on. I think a lot of, especially when it comes to flooding, a lot of relevant information is going to come out of that Jones-Edmonds vulnerability analysis, and that's not coming for another 4 months. Ish, I guess Stacy and Heather, if you want to correct me, I said it sounded like the beginning, the first parts were going to come out in maybe 4 months. So in terms of timing, do you think that there's enough, but without that sort of background information, the scientific studies that Jones-Edmonds is going to do, is there a way for us to move forward without that information, or would it be a more efficient use of time to focus on some other things in the near term, and then once we have that information in place, then we really dive in? That was a legit question. That was not a rhetorical question. Okay, I'm seeing Stacy say the first deliverables are 4 months. at least 4 months. I'm also seeing Ellen, I see what your comment about climate migrants and refugees. That is actually anywhere you see on this sheet where it says something about in migration, that is addressing essentially climate refugees or people who are moving inland and moving to our area because the areas where they currently live are no longer hospitable. Yeah, Stephen.
What you used the term agricultural compatibility.
Yeah.
I would prefer a focus on food security in the sense that, it would include many of the things you're talking about, but also understanding what our supply chain is and
Yeah.
what its vulnerabilities are. I think it's very likely that we're going to have multiple breadbasket failures in the coming decades. Certainly, it's entirely possible within the decade. The United States continues to be the major breadbasket for the world in terms of cereal grains. However, there is increasing stress, climatic stress on that portion of the world, and the Central Valley in California is under critical stress right now, and there's, I believe, imminent failure of several perennial crops that we've come to rely on coming out of that Central Valley. So transportation issues with respect to food supply. I don't know if anybody's looking at this formally as an employee of the city or the county, but I think we don't know what our supply chain is.
All right, I added that explicitly. So that was an excellent point. So I added that explicitly under, call it agricultural compatibility and food security. I mean, I think agricultural compatibility really has to do with our ability to produce food locally. That's what I was thinking about, but I absolutely agree that we need to be thinking about food security as a larger issue that comprises not only our ability to locally produce food, but our ability to get food from elsewhere. Any other thoughts?
No, I think I agree with Stephen that starting with the risk reduction on CIKR is where to start, because then it does tie in easily to energy security, for example, and then the built environment to increase energy security is a part of disaster risk reduction. The main grid goes down, we've got our own. We still, or at least we have key assets supported with microgrids. So I guess we just have to, break CIKR down maybe into how we want to tackle it.
So that's my question, I guess, to both of you at this point then is, when I look at those issues, I see those as things that are going to require outside technical assistance to really identify the specific vulnerabilities in our systems and to identify where we have overlapping vulnerabilities, where we're likely to have that cascading failure. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of when I say prioritization, I guess I need to be more clear. I agree that this needs to be a top priority. When I put it on the agenda, I was more interested in prioritizing the next items that we address as a committee. So what are we going to do in the next few months? And I realize that's kind of a different question, and I probably should have specified that. But I'm interested in your thoughts about whether you consider moving on this disaster risk reduction piece to be something that we can do without outside technical assistance. Is that something that we can do on our own by reading the literature and brainstorming for the next couple of months? Or is that something where it makes more sense to wait for this Jones-Edmonds paper that's really going to look at flooding, or something where we try to work with staff to see if there are any within, say, GRU, looking at the electric grid, have they performed their own internal assessment of those vulnerabilities? I just don't know if that's something that we can do on our own. What are your thoughts? Yeah, just jump in.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of peer-reviewed literature on all of these issues. What we can do is we can outline the top ones that we think are important. Certainly flooding and electricity outages, transportation disruptions, cascading failures, water treatment, healthcare and public health, and responsive emergency services. There is now starting to be a huge literature on this, and I doubt that the Jones-Edmonds report is going to go much beyond flooding. So let me ask a question about the Jones-Edmonds study. Do you really think they appreciate what climate change is as a consulting firm?
I can speak to that. They've put together a pretty good team, and I'm happy to share the proposal if you haven't already seen it that they submitted. And they've definitely got some sub-consultants on that have been doing some type of this work in other areas. So I have to say I was pleasantly, I was pleased when we did receive their bid package. So I think it will be broader than I originally thought it might be.
Why did you focus on flooding as the primary issue?
No, I mean, it has equity in it. It has infrastructure. I mean, flooding is a lot of it because it's being paid with our stormwater dollars.
Okay, all right, I get it.
What else is in there? And Mike, feel free to pop in and help me out if you've been looking at anything more recent than me. But I mean, flooding is one of the main things, but I don't think that that's the only thing. We actually had some on ag too, like what it could do to crops, shifting in intensity and frequency. So, winds also, not just rain, but yeah, a lot of those weather components.
I raised my hand because I had a little bit more anecdotal response to Stephen's question, which is I have a friend that works at Jones-Edmonds. He's been there a long time. And, 5-6 years ago, he was telling me about contracts they had with NASA to improve, upgrade, harden their launch pads and that sort of thing, because they recognize that climate change is there, regardless of what the presidential or state administration said about climate change. They knew it was happening. So I would say that yes, Jones-Edmonds is engaged in climate change, whether it's a source of revenue or because they believe in it. I think it's a combination of both.
Does anybody else on the committee have thoughts on this?
Megan, this is Christine. I guess as we go forward, just as much specifics as we can provide to each other on what exactly we're going to be looking into, and what exactly the outputs of this would needs to be.
Fair. So that was to I mean, that's kind of my bad earlier for not saying that when I was talking about priorities, I meant temporal prioritization. Like, what are we going to work on first? But to the point of what is the output, my vision for this is that, and again, this is open to interpretation. I'm giving you what I've been thinking about as a starting point. This is not necessarily the path that we have to take. But my sort of the way that I'm thinking about this is that we pick an area, we pick the language gets tricky, right? But we pick like a concern or an adverse effect that we want to focus on. And then we all, after the meeting, during that month before our next meeting, we do the research. So we look at other communities' climate action plans. That was some of the feedback from the Joint Policy Board, is that they wanted this benchmark. So we look at what other communities are doing. We look into the peer-reviewed literature. Are there any innovative solutions that maybe haven't made it into a climate action plan yet, but that we think would be suitable for our community that we can bring to the board? And then the following meeting would include a discussion of those ideas that we're all bringing to the table, including information from staff about the current state for the city and the county where we are. And then based on that feedback, we pick the items that we think are the most potential solutions, policies or programs that we think could have the greatest impact and be the best fit for our community. And then we ask staff to please look into that and bring us some more information. And from there, we start working towards crafting actual recommendations to send to the policy board, because their feedback was that that's what they want. They want us to start sending them specific recommendations relevant to climate change that they can take action on. Are you all looking at the spreadsheet, or is everyone's brain just fried?
So I can add, I'm just thinking about like the client, I was in a meeting yesterday, maybe with the vulnerability analysis, and feel like they're not going to be doing a ton with food systems. And I don't remember a lot with weatherization. So if what you're asking is, what are things that the CCAC can be working on that the consultants aren't really going to be getting into, those are kind of two things that come to my mind. And I know Heather's been, that there's been talk about weatherization in other places in the county. So I don't know if that's helpful or not for other things that are working, but those are two things that come to my mind that I don't feel like will be covered in a lot of detail in that analysis.
That's super helpful. So when you say weatherization, are you talking about basically insulating individual like private homes, or are we talking about weatherization in the context of more like hardening, like systems hardening from a disaster risk reduction perspective, or both?
I was thinking homes, like stuff that the CWC does and things like that. Because I think I'm sure they'll be focusing on some of the solutions and that'll come up, but I don't think they'll be diving into the like how to do that.
Okay. Yeah, so based on like with UAB, their focus is on most of the initiatives and the policies that they're recommending are focused on emissions mitigation. So I kind of think that our lane, there's obviously going to be a lot of overlap, but some of the things that they're not working on that we can be working on that's really within our charge is the resilience and adaptation and equity piece. I think that's where there's not a lot of work being done right now, and that's where we really have the opportunity to make a major contribution. So in terms of how I'm prioritization, just near term, but also longer term, just overall, I think that sort of resilience piece is where we have the opportunity to make a big impact. So in terms of like food, that information about like food systems, food security, weatherization, those are obviously all related to resilience. And yeah, that's great. I think that where we should start are the gaps, right? There's a lot of irons in the fire right now with the Jones-Edmonds analysis that they're doing with some of these other initiatives like the LEAP grant. So my suggestion is that we start in a gap. We start looking at what's not currently being done while continuing to stay informed about and involved in those ongoing efforts so that we can offer our insight when the opportunity arises. Yeah, Stephen.
Megan and committee members, I'm willing to do whatever you guys think we should do first.
I appreciate it, but help me out.
If you want to work on the gaps first, then let's move on that. I think that when the Jones-Edmonds report shows up, we will have a much better idea of what some of the gaps in DRR actually are.
Yes.
Because there will probably be things that they will not address that just are not part of their corporate purview. It's not something that they think they want to be looking into. We'll see how well it works out. On the whole, I'm hopeful that it's a really high level analysis that includes really, really good science. Let's see what comes back. But in the meantime, if there's some part of the consultant's report that's going to be relatively superficial, then I agree. Let's start there. I would suggest food security.
All right, I hear an unofficial motion for food security. Anybody else? Christine.
Oh, I'm good with food security as well. And excuse me if this has already been covered, but will the vulnerability analysis be coming out with anything that is directly can be directly used into this, into what the climate action plan, or is this more information that the staff and we will be pulling from in order to help build the climate action plan?
So I don't think they'll be writing the climate action plan. I think it'll be informing it. Maybe there'll be some cutting and pasting when we get to that part.
Mhm.
I think it might just be informing it more. And I'm not sure if I got at your question, Christine.
No, and I may not have been that clear. I was thinking how directly applicable what is being done will go into our solutions part that we're going to be working on. And if the answer is that they'll be providing information that we can use to better inform our understanding of areas of risk, but we also know that there's going to be certain actions that need to be taken need to be taken no matter what, right? I mean, I think we'll be pretty sure there's certain things we need to do. Then I'm all with food security being the top thing that we address, but I am less concerned about potentially investigating things that they may also be in parallel with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right.
Tristan
And we
made,
can
I
all,
don't know if you saw
ahead.
Tristan's comment, but I think she makes a good point.
I mean, we can also split the committee, essentially. We have 9 people, right? We can have, 4
Mhm.
people who want to look into food security, or 5 people who want to look into food security, and another 4 or 5 who really want to start digging in on disaster risk reduction. And to Christine's point, those things that we know we're going to need to do anyway, right?
Yeah,
Like, we know that there's going to be storms. We know that our electrical grid is vulnerable. We know that roads flood, so in
Yeah.
terms of doing some of that initial work, yeah.
Stacy, I would very much appreciate the scope.
Yeah.
So we can look at that again and see if in fact it's covering some of the things that we think need to be covered.
All right. Yeah. Stacey, can you just email it out to, or I guess Heather, can you email it out to us after the meeting? All right. Do we have any, I know that John is probably going to be, I don't know. I highly suspect that John is going to want to be involved in food security sort of group. Are you all right with doing 2 different groups, or do we want to just focus on one thing off the bat for next month?
No, I think it'd probably be good to look at a couple different areas, especially since we don't know exactly what might be covered, right? Working in parallel. So it'd be good to get ahead on a few to at least have things to just, discuss.
All right, so we have food security and essentially disaster risk reduction, or our CIKR considerations, cascading failures, looking at that as a system.
Yeah, but that includes food security and energy security, water security.
Yes, it does. I'm breaking them. When I look at like CIKR, I mean, I guess disaster risk reduction is not exactly the same thing, right? So like CIKR is really the infrastructure. It's more of an immediate system breakdown, I think, whereas food security, yes, that can be a single incident that causes a loss of food availability for a certain amount of time, but food security also has a much longer time horizon. That's something where it's like, it doesn't take a single disaster, it doesn't take a weather or a climate disaster locally to impact food security. Whereas for a lot of the CIKR considerations, that's going to require a local weather or climate disaster or weather or climate event to really stress those systems. So when I say food security, I am thinking more to Stephen's point earlier about food availability. across a longer time scale than just, a couple weeks or a couple months during a localized disaster situation. Any
Sure.
interest?
I just, including water security and the different types of, infrastructure concerns there, it's a broad category, was all the point I was making.
Oh, or water treatment?
That's a part of it, sure. Drinking water availability, ensuring your water infrastructure, like wastewater, is functional, doesn't get inundated. Because energy security falls into disaster risk reduction, and that's its own separate category. So when you're saying to use CIKR as one of the ones we go after, it includes some of these others. It's a very large category.
It does. I think that there's a different time horizon, and we can choose a different language to describe this. I think that there's a difference between the immediate impacts of a localized weather or climate event versus the larger impacts of climate change as a trend that produces numerous weather and climate events that stress systems that are distant in space from our own. So in terms of energy security, that sort of localized immediate threat would be, say, a hurricane comes through and it knocks out a lot of power poles and power lines, right? But energy security can also include increasing natural gas prices and the ability of people to pay their bills. And so those are both components of energy security, but one really has to do with hardening our local infrastructure, whereas one has more to do with looking at the system as a whole and considering more long-term trends and impacts. So we can talk about language. Maybe do you have a suggestion of better language to kind of differentiate?
If we're talking about resilience, then it's more our community's ability to, come back from one of these disaster events. That's my understanding.
I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, that's part of it, but not all of it. I think our resilience is also more of a long-term thing. I see hands from Christine. I don't know if that's left over. I see Stevens as a fresh hand. All right, Steven, you're up.
I was just going to say that in reviewing the various plans that municipalities have around the country and teaching the 3 courses that I teach on climate change and one on sustainability, what I've discovered is that nobody really has defined resilience in a way that's replicable. Often what they're using when they say resilience, what they really mean is a synonym for sustainability. And they imply that through their use of the term resilience, bouncing back from a perturbation is usually referenced at some point in their planning documents. What they're thinking is that the status quo is in fact acceptable. And often it's not. So the overarching goal of, I think, our committee would be to actually discuss what an ongoing ability to transform would look like. How would we be able to keep changing as conditions change moving forward? I know that sounds ethereal. It's not something you can really wrap your mind around, but nonetheless, the processes that we have in place tend to bias the entire system toward reinforcing the status quo. And that may not be useful to us. In fact, I don't think it is useful moving forward. If you look at the insurance industry, for example, if you look back at the concept of stationarity, so they're looking in the rearview mirror to come up with this concept of stationarity, which allows them to put boundaries on the 100-year time frame and the 500-year time frame for certain kinds of disasters. But stationarity is now out the window. Sometimes it's still relevant partially, but it's never completely relevant moving into the future. And so one of the things that I think we need to address in the climate action plan is what is the planning process itself moving forward, and how do we keep it in the process of transformation as things change, as things on the ground are actually changing, the challenges we're facing. So Megan, I think you're right in looking at the immediate response to, say, a Category 4 hurricane coming ashore, moving across the peninsula, then strengthening again in the Gulf, and then coming back across for a second whack at us. That's certainly not out of the question. It's the kind of disaster that I think we should assume as a worst case scenario. That's going to have an impact on all these things in the immediate aftermath of the impact. But I also agree that there's a long-term issue that will completely be changing the playing field, that will require ongoing transformation. For example, the food systems and our supply chain for food. That will be an ongoing transformation. The situation will be moving, it'll be changing depending on which breadbaskets in the world are failing, and how national governments are responding to them. And in addition, something we really haven't talked about, and that's the commodities market, and what kind of pricing the commodity market is putting on these essential cereal grains that we need. So that's a long way of saying I agree with you, Megan. There's two different categories here. One is the disaster preparedness per se, and the other is that long-term ability to transform.
Thank you, Stephen. So I have a proposal. We divide what we're looking at into essentially these two categories, right? We have immediate system shocks. That's going to be your local weather or climate disaster. And then we also have long-term stressors. So does that seem like an appropriate framework? We have input from the Joint Policy Board, and we as a committee have discussed addressing first those climate-related impacts that are both most likely and highest impact. And so that would suggest, that framework that we've previously agreed upon would suggest that we start with the immediate system shocks. And then once we have some sort of framework in place for that, something that we can pass on to the Joint Policy Board, then we move on to looking at these long-term stressors. How does that sound?
Yes, I agree. Addressing resilience concerns. I know he doesn't agree that there's an agreed upon definition, but yes, that is typically what a community addresses first.
Anybody want to offer thoughts on next steps? Because I've been talking and I don't know, it's like a dead audience. I feel like a comic flopping on stage tonight. Anybody like want to have some initiative and like offer somewhere to go on this? Christine. Yeah, go ahead.
What I said was brilliant. You just missed it. I like the way you broke it into the two big pieces. That makes a lot of sense. And what I was thinking of earlier was, would it make sense to then further break it into large scale scenarios? And I don't mean, well, yeah, large scale scenarios. So massive weather event, or, you know, I don't know, just looking at things, scenarios that then all these things fall out of. Is that something that would work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our main scenario is going to be, you know, a major hurricane that reaches this area at slow speed and with substantial winds. Because if you think about any other, you know, besides, I feel like the hurricane scenario, that's going to test you on water, that's going to test you on flooding. That's also going to test your electricity grid, especially when you throw wind in on it, and that's going to cover basically any local storm. And then I feel like the other major event would be potentially a heat wave, but we're actually fairly buffered as a peninsula. We're fairly buffered from major heat waves like, you know, we see in the, you know, continental climates like we see in the central part of the country. So in terms of those scenarios, my suggestion would be that we think about what happens during a hurricane. Like look at Irma and then make Irma stronger. That's kind of the worst case that we would need to be planning for.
It seems like hurricane would be the most likely large scale thing that would happen to us. I also would put out there potential drought, wildfires. I know it's we might consider it not as likely, but I think in 1994, is it 94? All that happened. So
98, I think, but yeah.
98, 98.
It was bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas very close to here that the entire towns were almost lost. So I think that should be considered as well.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Like wildland fires have not been a major concern here for a few years, but that's not because they don't happen here. We've just got a quiet period.
And obviously that would have different impacts on food systems, et cetera, but it would definitely have very adverse impacts.
All right, this sounds promising. In terms of homework, obviously we have a list here that this sort of big spreadsheet that I put together. It's not currently organized in immediate shocks versus long-term stressors. I'm happy to do that. I think it would also be valuable for the members of the committee to be thinking about these impacts as well, so that we all, before the next meeting, run through these scenarios in our mind. We're all coming at this from different perspectives. And so I think there's value in combining our insights about what sort of impacts we should be concerned about. And then at our next meeting, we can combine that list, put it all together, and then decide what to move on first. Does that sound like a plan? Yeah, I see 1 thumbs up. 2 thumbs up. 3 thumbs up. Okay.
One question really quickly. As a municipality, the county or the city or both, do we have the ability to mandate that the local grocery stores supply us with information about their supply chains?
I don't think so, but I'm not the right person to ask. I mean, they might. They
I
might
think
be
we ought to
like,
ask legal advice on this from the county and see what they say, because we're at their mercy essentially, and the commodities market. So enough said. Okay, I quit.
yeah, we all remember the beginning of COVID, where like you realize that Floridians were taking it seriously because there was beer left, but no fruits and vegetables. And that never happens during a hurricane. All right, so plan homework for ourselves for our next meeting, which I don't think we're doing a December meeting, are we? Or are we? Stacy or Heather?
We have one scheduled, but we can decide to skip it. It's up to you guys.
Okay, we'll hit that at the end of the meeting. But our homework for the next meeting, whether that is December or January, is going to be to look at the 2 scenarios of a major hurricane reaching inland with think Irma level rain and more wind, and then also consider drought and wildfire risk. And there's probably some good newspaper articles and research that we could do looking back at that, was it 95 or 98, that late 90s event, to get some ideas of what that would actually look like. And obviously there's been even more development since then. So there would be likely more communities and more, physically at risk from wildfire now than there was then. Okay. Yeah.
So are we looking at what the potential impacts would be, and then from that, we'll move forward with looking at repercussions from it, or how far down the line should we be going with this?
I think this point kind of large level. So looking at specific impacts, because I think that's how my mind works. So I think about Irma and I think about, oh yeah, like Hogtown Creek was within a half a block of my house. That was unusual, and just like emergency vehicles literally could not get into the neighborhood because so many of the roadways were flooded and the others were blocked by trees. So those are sort of the considerations that I'm immediately going to bring to the table and then convert those into something high level. So flooding, and then emergency vehicles being unable to access areas for a certain amount of time, during which time those areas are going to need to be self-sufficient. So those, and I don't know how your mind works or how anybody else's mind works, but I think the idea is to kind of game it out, think about specific impacts, and then try to generalize that impact a little bit. So it would be, roadways blocked, areas that are inaccessible to emergency services for 2 days, a few days, right? Does that answer the question? Okay. And each of us does not need to try to think of all the impacts. That's unreasonable. I really kind of go with what your strength is, go with what your background is, with what your experience is, those areas where you have the most experience or expertise to offer, please try to delve into those so that because we have diverse backgrounds, hopefully when we come together, we'll have a fairly complete picture.
Me again. Should we do it in order for this to be most useful as it comes together? Should we create some type of template or format, how we want everything kind of laid out, so that it's all somewhat similar, so we can kind of piece it together? Or do we want everybody just to go to their strengths and make sure just something gets on the paper? I think either one's effective.
I would almost say the template, if we can. So I'll offer this up, and if other people are like, no, that doesn't work with my mind, my brain doesn't think like that, then feel free to say that. But that CAP impacts and concerns spreadsheet, when I did concerns with sectors, we could essentially use a similar format. And in fact, you could just like take that spreadsheet and keep the columns and like delete everything else. But think about the specific impact and then what systems are involved. So it would be like, and again, because the idea is going to be to take a look at these specific impacts and then generalize it up to the system and say, okay, we need to think about hardening this particular system against these specific threats. I think ultimately that's what we want to get to, so that we can say this system, these threats, and then hand it off to staff who have sort of the local expertise to be able to say, okay, what is currently being done about, like, what is known about this? What is currently being done about this? What do we need to do to actually prepare above and beyond what's currently on offer? I want one.
That's got one of those Coke sliders that goes over a beer. So don't let her fool you.
I literally have a beer koozie that I've used for like fizzy water, and I'll forget that it's a beer koozie and I'll get like strange looks. I'm like, no. It's literally it's LaCroix. I swear. It's 9 a.m. I'm not hitting the hard stuff yet. All right.
No White Claws, huh? At 9 a.m.
Christine, those are excellent questions. Any other thoughts or refinements for us so that we're actually putting together something useful for next time?
just so I have in the notes, so I have basically, we're gonna outline which scenario we're addressing, which will be really obvious very quickly. What specific impacts will come from the scenario, what systems are involved. And then I have the next part is what are the threats to the system, but I feel like maybe that's redundant. Someone help me out here. Scenario, impact, systems involved, and then what specific threats are posed to the system as the results.
I think the threat is gonna kind of be the impact, right?
Right?
No, wouldn't that be further like second order effects? Is that kind of what you mean, Christine?
Maybe, yes. So if flooding has occurred, systems that are involved are X, Y, and Z, and then, yeah, what comes out of that? And I don't know if I'm wording it very well, so.
No, I think that makes sense. What other risks or outcomes, negative outcomes need to be thought of or thought about and addressed?
Okay, yep.
So can you give us an example? So like, I was
Else?
like
Give an
with flooding,
example?
and no, if it's flooding, right, the systems that are involved are gonna be stormwater, wastewater, roadways, potentially public health, septic, so when you talk about threats, are you talking about people are unable, are you talking about the threat to the system or like the follow on?
Threats
Is
probably
it-
not the best, might not be the best term for that category.
Yeah, so help us out.
Well, impacts, right? Negative impacts.
So in the case of hurricane coming through, flooding occurs, we talked about emergency vehicle access being cut off.
Yeah.
Which involves roadways, et cetera. And then the next piece out of that, what falls after that?
I would simply call them secondary impacts.
Okay,
Cascading impacts that or compound impacts, but I think cascading is more near term. Compound tends to be extended into the future. So cascading and compound impacts, but these are under the category of secondary impacts from an initial hit.
So what would an example of that be? Roadways are blocked off, so medical services can't get into a person having a heart attack? Like, is that the sort of secondary or cascading impact that we're thinking about, or is there something?
That's relatively immediate, like a series of cascading impacts would be flooding and landslides. We don't have to worry about that with our topography, but say flooding and then secondary contamination of the water supply or failure of our sewage system, the stormwater combined sewer system outflow, putting human sewage and contaminated water into the regional surface waters. So that would be a cascading event. A compound event would be the infrastructure damage that could be worsened by subsequent events or continuing rainfall, or so infrastructure such as roadways, long-term repair of those, longer-term repair of those, things like that would require significant resources to actually recover the functioning of society as a whole over time. So I don't have this all nailed down. I'm just thinking out loud as to what it would be. But the term secondary impacts would, I think, make the most sense. I'd have to think very critically about what those are for Alachua, for our region. There's a lot known about other regions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? I mean, like there's other research done for other areas, but really drilling it down, saying what is, again, like what is the exposure? And then what are our systems vulnerabilities? So what's the regional exposure, and then what's the systems vulnerabilities, or even population vulnerabilities? Although at this point, we're really thinking more systems, but.
Well, an example of a long-term consequence would be failure of the public health system and standing water resulting in vector-based disease being spread through the area. And as temperatures go up, I agree we're buffered by the oceans, but that's what everybody in the Pacific Northwest thought. So, you know, there are projections for Florida temperatures that will scare your pants off.
You're talking to a girl from Oklahoma, though. I don't know. It's been hot enough that it literally melted the rearview mirror off the car. So
there you go. Okay, I understand.
It's less than 115. I'm not even worried.
Yeah, I understand continental impacts, but yeah, you're right. But
no, but so are you. I'm just joking.
Yeah. So you know, I think the long-term impacts on public health are things that are not being considered. And it's not just vector-based diseases, it's contamination of food supply and contamination of water supply.
Does that answer?
That's why I'm in Montana.
You get back to us when you're first snowed in with like 8 feet.
Well, it's supposed to snow tonight. It's under a weather advisory. So
my weather station says it's 70 degrees outside.
yeah, it's 28 here. So
oh man, can't even wear flip-flops anymore.
No.
Christine, does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. And of course, as I'm typing, things kind of keep spiraling out of it. So, I mean, yeah, a very simplistic way to look at it is having scenario, a specific impact such as flooding, systems involved, example, roadways blocked, and then an impact from the roadway being blocked is emergency vehicles unable to access those in need. There's a lot of things that can cascade out of roadways being blocked. And then you can have longer term compounding events, if I'm using that term right, Stephen, it's things such as infrastructure damage, disease spread, food supply contamination, water supply contamination, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Exactly, that's correct. Cascading failures are closer to the event itself.
Okay.
In time.
Okay. Got it. So systems involved with a secondary cascading it. Got it. Okay. So I will, I'll chuck this into a basic table for you all in the notes, and then we can go from there. I think this makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you for making our input useful and organized.
I don't know, maybe Heather can answer this, but are there resources that Alachua County Emergency Management can provide, the research they've done, what they've experienced in the past? It looks like on the website they've identified a lot of these threats and just kind of giving quick blurbs, but I wonder if there's further research behind each of them.
We can find out.
This is what I'm looking at.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask, there are frameworks in other parts of the state that we might be able to go off of that could be helpful. Are y'all familiar with the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Collaborative or the Southeast Florida
Climate Compact is
Thank you.
one. The other place that I would look that's always had a very progressive approach to climate change and disaster risk reduction is Sarasota County.
Okay.
Can you all put these resources in the chat and then have us, Heather, you're copying these.
Yep.
The chat, right? And then can we send those out as well? Because yeah, but there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel here. I think that a lot of these approaches and a lot of the general work has been done. I think where we have the opportunity to value add on this is taking it hyper local, taking it into our community. So yeah, we don't. So when there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Really, we need to be thinking about our specific community impacts. So like flooding is a thing, right? Like any of these resources are going to say in Florida, We need to be concerned about flooding and the impacts of flooding, but it's going to take somebody who lives here in Gainesville or who lives in one of the smaller outlying communities to say, you know, this neighborhood regularly gets cut off, you know, when it rains, or to say, this group of people, they don't have cars, you know, so they don't have access to evacuate, or to be able to say, you know, the value is in the hyperlocal here, in my opinion.
I 100% agree. You know, and on that, I mean, can we start looking into the community or into other offices within the county to bring in people to talk to us and have these conversations that have this experience? Maybe we start with the emergency management community.
That's a great idea.
You know, because we got some good perspective from Wes earlier, and I think bringing in more folks like that, maybe having more folks in regularly, will help guide us since we're learning.
Yeah, Heather, do you have contact with emergency management? Could you reach out and ask if they have somebody who'd be willing to come to our meeting and really just discuss the work that they've done and share resources? Adam, do you have any other specific questions you want them to kind of prepare?
I mean, you know, basically we talk about, you know, what threats are affecting the county, you know, what plans are in place to address those and educate the community on those threats, and what can be done to mitigate those threats. Would be a great conversation.
Thank you. Mike, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, and I don't want to step on Heather's toes, but having Jen Grice, from Emergency Management, she can speak to us for one thing about the local mitigation strategy, which is a periodically updated document that the county and the municipalities that want to join in to address how we recover from disaster. Where does all the debris go and that sort of thing? And that would be a specific thing I think she could talk to with us about.
That'd be great.
Okay.
I say that because I know growth management's involved in that sometimes too, but I think emergency management drives it.
I can reach out to Jen and see if she's available. Once we decide if we're having a December meeting or a January meeting.
Yeah, we don't want to spend
I gotta sign off. I've got
Yeah,
I've got a dinner engagement I gotta get to, so.
I'm gonna have to go as well.
all right,
So
thanks, Rob.
Take care.
Thank you,
I'll
Stephen.
volunteer for a piece once I see the breakdown and the outline, and I'll see where I can apply my expertise best.
Sounds good.
So,
Thank you, Stephen.
or maybe a couple of pieces. So I'll be there. I'll help.
All right, before
so-
you leave, December meeting, yay or nay, can you make it?
I can make it. I'll just be here preparing for my courses next semester. So
Okay, thank you. All right, we're bumping up against our time. So community engagement, man, that's like if something gets continued, it's always that. Yeah, bye. All right. Yeah, out of respect for time, I'm gonna suggest that we continue community engagement yet again. Any thoughts on that? Are we okay with continuing that?
Yeah, but maybe we put it on the first to do for the next agenda.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so for community engagement, what I think that we need to be really considering, and this goes to Christine put together a really excellent draft of like a community engagement plan. I think there are some critical questions in that we still haven't answered. And I think that I personally would like to see us start addressing those questions. So like what information do we want from the public? You know, which segments of the public are we most interested in getting information from? What do we plan to do with that information? How are we going to use it? Kind of what are we offering the public in return for that? And then how do we go about getting that information? You know, are we, Wes mentioned that they do a lot of their communications and outreach to staff. They do some publicly noticed meetings where they engage with the community. So what ways, what methods do we want to use to do that engagement? So those, in terms of the community engagement, those are the questions I think we need to answer before we start talking about specifics on anything else. So Heather, on the next agenda, item number 8 is suggest items for next regular meeting, and I think Trista's on point. We're gonna, if this stays at the bottom of the agenda, it's gonna keep getting continued. So can we bump it to the top? Okay. And then the sort of prioritizing vulnerabilities. I think we need a different language for that. Scenario, I guess scenario analysis and immediate disaster impacts would be also on the agenda. So where we have done that background research, and thank you for Adam for putting those resources in the chat. And I would ask Heather if you can send us that transcript that has the links. So again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're really trying to value add for hyper local impacts that we don't think have been addressed in other resources. So identify what, again, it's a gaps thing, right? We don't need to we're not trying to be redundant, we're trying to fill gaps. All right, and then the next meeting is scheduled for December 9th. So honestly, that's not so late in the month. I kind of think that it's valuable to keep that meeting. It's only in 3 weeks since this one got pushed back. Any thoughts from the rest of the committee?
I will try to make it, but I'm going to be working in DC that week.
Okay.
So it might be tough for me to make it.
So if that's the case, given your background, I think that I would want you to be here when emergency management comes and presents. So Heather, do you mind inviting them to a January meeting? That would give them more time to plan. And then Adam, I assume you're going to be there for the January meeting?
I will.
Okay.
And remember, the January meeting is an in-person meeting.
Yep. So we're good on December. We're going to keep December. Is everybody okay? Basically, this is a check. Is anybody taking sort of extended holiday travel starting that early? Are we going to be losing a substantial portion of the committee? No? Yeah, me neither.
I just want to add that I might not be able to come because of a conference that I'm actually involved in planning it, and I'm not sure when it ends that day. So
And maybe that's actually why I'm not going to that conference as well, because of DC. I was hoping to be able to, but
right. Yeah, it's taken over the last 6 months of my life. So I have to be there for all of it. But so it's not holiday. It's just
Okay.
related.
So we may be down 2. Let's see where we get. We'll keep the meeting on the calendar and we'll see how many we get, how many CCAC members that we have, and we'll focus on the community engagement and the scenario planning. So Amanda and Adam, if you're not able to make it, will you please send basically, it sounds like Christine, are you going to send out like a template for us? So if you would please, send your completed template to Heather so that we can make sure that your thoughts are included if you're not able to make it.
yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Are y'all
So-
also planning to send a poll to look at different dates still?
Yes. That actually
then-
brings us. Go ahead, Trista.
Yeah, sorry. I was just also going to ask, so y'all mentioned that in January it's going to be in person. Is that in person going forward? Or is that just a January meeting?
No, so we decided to do like once a quarter in person, basically, so that we are able to vote. Because like right now, this workshop format, we're not able to vote. So we were going to do like once a quarter in person that would allow us to vote on any items that need to be voted on. Basically. And it was actually kind of nice to see you all in person. At least like half your face.
Y'all want to keep the December 9th meeting and look at changing dates starting in January?
Yes.
Okay.
So that actually brings us to 9, the meeting recap and action items. Christine, do you mind giving us that?
Yep, let's see what I got here. Okay, I have, Liliana's gonna get back to us on what the flood-wise final product will look like. We will get the scope for the Jones Edmond work. That's the scope of what they're gonna be saying they propose to do. Do we also want to request the RFP if we don't already have it?
Is it relevant? I mean, it sounds like the contract is signed.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay, that's a good point. Okay, let's just go with their scope and we don't need to read the RFP because we'll have enough. Robert's gonna let us know who's gonna replace him if somebody is. And then I'm going to send out the draft table. Please tweak it if it needs to be tweaked. But I'll send out the draft table with our homework being that we're gonna look at the scenarios and start working on specific impacts that could happen. So that's our homework. December 9th, we're going to be meeting, and January will be in person. Is there anything I missed?
I think the doodle poll for possibly
Yes.
shifting our meetings.
And I'll invite Jen Grice to the January meeting once we have a date.
Okay. How do you spell her name?
Grice.
You. And the doodle poll will go out about future meeting times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Days of week and week of month.
That's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you. Every time you do that, I'm like, wow, I already forgot that. I'm very grateful.
If folks can be just proactive, if you know of recurring meetings that you have, if you can just email that to me and let me know that so that I don't bother to put it in the doodle poll, that would be great.
Will do. All right, if we don't have anything else from the committee, we can open it up for public comment. I know that looks like who we see. I see a couple people who have hung with us. I see Nancy and David have hung with us. There were also some other comments, I think, in the chat. I think Ellen was in there for a while. So we also have some public comment captured in the chat, but so Nancy and David, Nancy, I see that your hand is up. Oh, David's hand is up also. So Heather, can you help to promote them so that they can unmute themselves?
They're
We'll go,
promoted
I saw
now.
Nancy's hand first, so Nancy.
Hi, great meeting. Thank you all for your hard work here. So I think a joint meeting with the UAB is really, really great. I missed Wendell. I had gone to be in person tonight, so I missed his presentation. Anyway, but bringing the two of you together, I've hoped for that for a long time. I think it'll be hugely valuable. I think it's great bringing in some of the people in different departments, like the ER, that's fantastic. So you jumpstart rather than taking time. The forestry department, my son is there, but they do amazing work with controlled burns and fire management. And then working food, I'm so happy you're talking about food systems. That is core. It links together flooding, stormwater, heat island, public health, all kinds of stuff. And I was going to offer to do a short presentation, but I think my area would be more around the resilience side, and it looks like you're in the disaster mitigation and more immediate. But if you ever want that, I'd be happy to do that. Food systems, Working Food is doing some amazing things with seed systems and minority engagement and equity. And they were, in 3 days, they set up a whole food system linking our farmers, people in need, bypassing grocery stores. So thinking about bringing in people who could really give you some localized info really well. And then last thing I would say, in the community engagement, a thought I had was folks are so visually oriented, but also interactive. I participated in a participatory budget exercise with the county years ago, and it changed people's minds. It opened their eyes so much because they had no idea of what goes into stuff. So that would be something I'd throw out. You know, typically we just go and ask questions or something, but if there were a way to set up interactive, here's where your energy, when you flip the switch, work it back, you know, things like that. Anyway, thank you. And I'll send a bunch of resources here to Heather. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nancy. I appreciate it. And those are good suggestions about the forestry department, especially since wildfires and droughts were one of the major scenarios, one of our bigger exposures.
Yeah,
That's
I was just in New Mexico, and the ED of the Western Landowners Alliance actually said Florida's fire management and forest management is nationally recognized for their expertise. So it might be valuable.
No, I think it certainly would. Yeah, I mean, the Southeast is actually ahead of the Mountain West in terms of prescribed burns.
Exactly.
So trying not to let it get out of hand. All right, thank you, Nancy. David, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead, please?
Sure, I think I'm already unmuted. I'm dazzled and amazed by the 5 people there and your longevity and durance and all that resilience to be able to sit in a meeting for 2.5 hours or so. You know, I really appreciate the emphasis on value is in the hyperlocal. I think that's really spot on. There is so much written out there about climate change at this point that there's just a vast amount of information. I agree with Stephen at some point, questioning the consultant and just what they're, I don't know them personally, but I wonder what value they're going to contribute that's especially insightful. But that's, I guess we'll see in 4 months or something like that. One of the concerns I had identifying disasters, I think heat might be one of them. You know, Salem, Oregon got to 117 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's only 50 miles from the ocean. And that's a really cold ocean. The Pacific is way, so I just am concerned that we're going to avoid or not include something just because it hasn't happened yet. I agree that Florida, it's obviously a peninsula, so it's unlikely that you know, some extreme heat is going to happen like that. But I lived in the Pacific Northwest for 25 years, and I don't think anybody in Portland, Oregon would have thought that what was that, the streetcar, the wires melted or something like that. So nobody predicted that. There were no models that predicted that. So I think we need to be concerned. I think heat is a concern that we really need to identify and look into more carefully. And finally, I really appreciated Wes's insight. I thought that was interesting and useful. I'm relatively new to the community, and I know a lot about the carbon cycle. And when he stated that the biomass plant was carbon neutral, I just worry about that information being, I'm not so convinced that it is. And for it not to be challenged is problematic in my perspective. I understand there may be reasons for him saying that, but just concerned. I know we have the biomass plant. We can't really do much about it, but concerned about folks in the community believing that it is carbon neutral. So that's, I wish that I had challenged that in some way, but I'm not sure how productive that is. So those are my thoughts for the meeting. Thanks so much for doing the essential and really important work that you're doing. It's really important. So thanks.
Thanks, David. And you should include yourself amongst the resilient and the longevity, because you stuck with us too. And,
Right. Thanks.
So the biomass, maybe reach out to Heather and see if Stephen's willing to have that conversation. I know that Stephen was quite skeptical of the biomass as well, and he had some conversations with folks at GRU that actually has changed his mind based on comments that he's made on the meetings. That he's
I talked to Stephen last week about this.
Okay.
And he is not convinced that it's carbon neutral.
Still not.
So
Okay.
I just talked to him last week, independently.
Okay. I was going to say, I think of everybody on the committee, he is the one who has the most knowledge of the biomass plan and the most knowledge of, its impacts on the carbon cycle and whether it really and truly is carbon neutral.
Well, who else in the community who's not affiliated with GRU would be good to talk to? Is somebody on the committee here, Heather, or you? Who else would be able to provide me insight? Because I am recently moved here.
That's a good question. I tell you, Stephen, I think, is the one who's most knowledgeable on our committee, but you could ask him who his contact was at GRU, because I mean, whoever he was talking to there is probably the person who has access to the raw data to be able to make that determination.
Okay, great. So nobody in CCAC would be a good contact person, is that right?
Besides Stephen.
Okay, great, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I take your point about considering heat to be a threat. And I see that Nancy chimed in on the chat. The difference kind of with we don't need to get too much into the weeds, but in terms of the Pacific Northwest, like those states, if you live there, the western part of the state is very, very hot on the leeward side of the mountains, and the windward side of the mountains is actually quite cool, right? So that heat wave event basically set up a blocking pattern such that the sea breeze was not able to penetrate inland and was not able to keep the more coastal communities cool. But because Florida doesn't have that sort of topography, that sort of blocking pattern is less likely. Although we certainly we'll get, the subtropical high, over Bermuda will shift back and forth over our area, and that can bring us more, hotter weather. So that's not to say that we are invulnerable to heat. We absolutely are vulnerable to heat, but also our area, because it's regularly very hot, we have a lot more people here have air conditioners, are used to heat to a certain extent, and we have the infrastructure in place to cope with it. Although obviously, if you have a prolonged heat event, then you start to stress the system in terms of electricity demand. So that's why I consider that to be less pressing. That doesn't mean that it's not a threat, though.
Yeah, I do think David's right that it is up there. Since we are inland, we don't have the rising seas concerns or the saltwater intrusion concerns. And in Florida, the number of extreme heat days, or black flag days, as we call it in the Army, are going to rise. And you brought it up. Since we're going to have higher numbers of these annually, then we are more likely to have some of those at the same time we're dealing with a disaster event where we might not have energy for air conditioning. So it's definitely a concern here in Florida.
But actually, the disaster, I mean, that is an important point. Behind hurricanes, you often will get sort of subsidence, and you'll get hot weather behind a hurricane, which is particularly difficult to cope with when you also don't have electricity and air conditioning. That's a good point. All
Thanks
right.
so much. Thanks so much, Megan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you,
bet.
Nancy. Do we have any other thoughts from the committee before we close out? No? If you, so Adam, to your point with heat, and this also kind of goes back to David's, we had mentioned hurricanes and drought wildfire as sort of our immediate shocks concerns. We can put heat on there. I think that's going to be sort of a smaller subset of things that are affected, but if we want to address that at this point, we can do that. So.
I mean, as we go through, since we're doing it based on threats with the template that Christine's going to send out,
Yep.
yeah, I was going to include some stuff there. So
Sounds good. All right, thank you all. I know we ran a little longer. Thanks for sticking with it, those of you who were able to. And our next meeting is going to be December 9th. We're going to be right here in our living rooms and home offices, and then we'll see each other in person on January. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
thank you.
Good
everyone.
night. Thank you.
Good night.